Don Johnson was once the epitome of cool on television. He had everything: luxury cars, designer suits, and the attention of nearly every woman in Hollywood. In the 1980s, he completely dominated pop culture. But what happened when the cameras stopped rolling is truly shocking. How does someone go from being a primetime icon to almost ending up homeless? One moment, Don was earning massive paychecks per episode, and the next, he was making desperate deals just to get by. The public saw a legendary figure, but behind closed doors, Don was living through a painful and deeply personal crisis. How did he lose everything? And now, at 75, how is he holding up? Once you know the full story, you may never see him the same way again. Before his fall, it's important to understand just how massive Don Johnson was in the 80s. Back then, he was the face of style, thanks in large part to his role on Miami Vice. He popularized the iconic white suits, pastel shirts, and no-socks look. By the late 80s, he was making millions every year. He had a hit TV series, a music career with charting songs, and movie offers pouring in. Don didn't just have wealth, he lived extravagantly. His real estate included a huge Colorado ranch, a Hollywood mansion, and a luxury residence in Miami. His garage featured names like Ferrari, Lamborghini, and Porsche. He socialized with Hollywood royalty, Jack Nicholson, Barbra Streisand, Melanie Griffith, and even a young Leonardo DiCaprio, who dated Don's daughter, Dakota Johnson. Everything seemed perfect, but eventually, the dream life began to unravel. Long before the fame, Don Johnson's life was far from glamorous. Born on December 15, 1949, in Flat Creek, Missouri, a tiny town in the middle of America, Donnie Wayne Johnson came from humble beginnings. His mother was only 16 when he was born, and his father was just 19. They were struggling young parents trying to raise a child in poverty. The family eventually moved to Wichita, Kansas, where Don grew up. His upbringing was far from ideal. Money was always tight, and his family lived a tough working-class life. He didn't have access to acting classes, industry connections, or even emotional support. He later shared that both his parents were often absent and under constant stress. In one interview, Don opened up about his childhood, saying, "I had the Queen Ella maltreatment and parents who divorced when I was 12 years old, and I was the oldest. I really was unhappy and I left home at 16. That's right, he struck out on his own as a teenager. Despite the rough start, Don had a spark. He was rebellious, charming, full of confidence, and he knew it. He wanted more than the limited life his hometown offered. Don has said that growing up in such harsh conditions became his motivation to aim higher. "I had a lot of challenges when I was young, not physically, but emotionally and psychologically. But I only later discovered that's what lights the fire in creativity. Those challenges are the fuel," he said. So how did a troubled kid from Kansas become a Hollywood star? It all started in high school when he needed extra credits and joined the drama club. He wasn't looking for a calling, just a requirement. But his teacher saw something special and cast him as Tony in West Side Story. That performance changed everything. Don said, "The moment I stood on stage, it was a drug. The audience was showing me love, which more than made up for the stuff I didn't get at home." After high school, he committed to acting. He enrolled at the University of Kansas on a partial scholarship and majored in drama. Later, he transferred to the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco, a top-tier institution that trained many respected actors. That's where the doors of the industry started to open. In the late 60s and early 70s, Don landed small parts in theater and indie films. One of his early roles was in the edgy post-apocalyptic film A Boy and His Dog, which gained cult status and gave Don some early recognition. But stardom was still far away. Throughout the 70s, Don hustled hard, taking whatever work he could, bit roles, TV guest appearances, and constant auditions. It was a grind filled with rejection and frustration. Then, in 1984, after more than a decade of near misses, his big break came. He landed the role of Detective Sonny Crockett on Miami Vice, a stylish crime drama that unexpectedly exploded in popularity. The show became a pop culture sensation. Don didn't just act in Miami Vice, he defined it. With sleek fashion, fast cars, and even a pet alligator, his character became a symbol of cool. The show changed the way TV looked and felt. Don was suddenly everywhere, and magazine covers, music videos, and late-night shows. He was earning thousands per episode. In just 5 seasons, he went from struggling actor to jet-setting star. And he didn't stop with acting, he also pursued music. In 1986, he released a pop-rock album titled Heartbeat, which became a surprise hit. The title track landed on the Billboard charts, and Don performed in live concerts and duets with icons like Barbra Streisand. Was he a great singer? Maybe not, but fans didn't care. At the time, Don Johnson could do no wrong. By the end of the 80s, he had everything: TV fame, a hit album, enormous wealth, and a life filled with yachts, red carpets, and designer suits. His rags-to-riches story felt like a Hollywood dream. But the higher he climbed, the harder the fall. Things began to spiral. Don started making poor decisions, financially and personally, that led to major losses. He didn't just lose money, he lost relationships, stability, and control of his life. When it came to love, Don Johnson's romantic life was as headline-making as his career. He didn't just date, he had whirlwind marriages, dramatic breakups, reconciliations, and love stories that fueled tabloids. His personal life was as chaotic as it was glamorous. Don has been married 5 times, to 4 different women. 2 of those marriages were so brief they were annulled within days. To this day, little is known about some of those relationships, adding to the mystery surrounding his personal saga. Don has revealed the identities of 2 women, one of whom was a dancer and the other a wealthy, superficial figure. Their relationship was fueled by youthful, impulsive love, the kind often seen among Hollywood's rich and famous. However, Don's love life took a more intriguing turn when he met Melanie Griffith. The pair met on the set of the 1973 film The Herd Experiment, and their relationship quickly became the subject of much attention. They were inseparable, and by the time Melanie turned 18, they were engaged. They married in January 1976, but by July of that same year, they had already separated. A few months later, in November, they were officially divorced. The whirlwind romance was passionate, chaotic, and very much in line with Hollywood drama. Yet, this wasn't the end of their story. Don and Melanie would eventually reunite more than a decade later, proving they shared something truly special. In 1989, they remarried, and this time they welcomed their daughter, Dakota Johnson, who would later become a major star. Unfortunately, even their second marriage didn't last, and by 1996, they had parted ways again. Melanie later reflected on their troubled marriage, admitting the strain it caused. She said, "He's no angel, he's not easy. It's hard for me to imagine life without him, but we are changing in different ways." Don, on the other hand, acknowledged the deep love they shared despite their separations, saying, "Some people are just meant to be together, and I think that was true for Melanie and me, so we got married twice. I don't believe love dies. It changes and becomes something else." Despite their past, Don and Melanie remain close, co-parenting their daughter Dakota and occasionally supporting her publicly. But Don's relationships didn't stop there. Even when he wasn't married, he remained a fixture in high-profile Hollywood romances, which were often messy enough to grab headlines. Don dated Barbra Streisand in the late 80s, and they became one of Hollywood's most glamorous power couples. However, their relationship didn't last. He also had a long-term relationship with model and actress Patti D'Arbanville in the early 80s, and though they lived together and had a son, Jesse Johnson, they never married. Then there was Uma Thurman. They were briefly spotted together in the early 90s, sparking rumors, but their fling was short-lived and received backlash due to their age difference. Don also had a relationship with Jodie Lynn O'Keefe, which raised even more eyebrows. The two had worked together on Nash Bridges, where she played his daughter, and soon after, they began dating. Given Jodie's age of 18 and Don being in his late 40s, their romance attracted significant media attention. They eventually dated for several years, with constant gossip following them. Don was no stranger to relationships with younger women, and that brought even more controversy. However, in 1999, Don surprised everyone by settling down for good. This time, it stuck. He married Kelly Fledger, a former preschool teacher and socialite from San Francisco. Kelly had a completely different vibe from the Hollywood types he had dated before, and perhaps that's exactly what Don needed for a stable relationship. Kelly was 27, while Don was 49, but despite the significant age gap, their marriage worked. They have been together for over 2 decades, living a relatively quiet and drama-free life. They have 3 children together, and Don credits Kelly with grounding him and helping him become a better man after years of tumultuous living. She was the stability he needed in his chaotic life. Before Kelly, though, Don was living an incredibly wild lifestyle, and this behavior ultimately led to some of his biggest losses, particularly his struggles with addiction. When someone rises as quickly and dramatically as Don did, there's often a darker side hidden beneath the surface. For Don, it wasn't just the pressures of fame or the stresses of Hollywood, it was something far deeper. While the public saw a cool, confident star in white linen suits, behind the scenes, Don was battling inner demons that nearly destroyed everything he had built. The fame became dangerous, the wealth became messy, and his life began slipping out of control. After the success of Miami Vice, Don Johnson became one of the most famous men in the world. He was rich, good-looking, and dating the elite of Hollywood, able to get whatever he wanted. But with that lifestyle came its own challenges. The party scene in the 80s wasn't just about casual drinks and dancing, it was filled with alcohol and illicit substances. Hollywood was overflowing with temptation, and Don didn't hold back. Between working long hours on different projects and spending his free time at clubs and parties, he numbed the pressures of fame however he could. Years later, Don admitted that the pressures of Hollywood had led him to these destructive habits. When I was a young man in Hollywood, illicit substances and partying were everywhere, and it was hard to escape. It doesn't become a problem immediately, it takes time, and it led to some poor choices, he said. His indulgence in these vices laid the foundation for his eventual downfall, leaving him broke and financially unstable. The drinking became his way of coping with the anxiety, loneliness, and overwhelming expectations that came with being a Hollywood star. What started as fun soon spiraled into chaos. By the early 1990s, the effects of his partying began to show. Although he was still successful, having started the hit series Nash Bridges, Don wasn't the same. Rumors of erratic behavior and mood swings circulated, and there was a highly publicized incident where he insulted and threatened radio hosts while intoxicated. Eventually, Don checked into rehab, though the details were kept private. Later, he admitted that his drinking had taken over his life, and he realized if he didn't stop, he would lose everything, his family, his career, and possibly even his life. It was a sobering wake-up call that forced him to face the truth. Don's struggle with addiction led him to make several poor decisions, but nothing could have prepared him for the financial troubles that were to come. These troubles began with a scandal in 2002, which would change everything for him. By then, Don Johnson was no longer the same flashy star he once was. He remained famous, charming, and still living a lavish lifestyle, but suddenly, he was thrust into the spotlight for a much darker reason, not related to his career or any new roles. The incident remains a source of controversy and intrigue even today. It's often considered one of the strangest and most unbelievable chapters of Don Johnson's career. In November 2002, while traveling through Europe, Don landed at the German-Swiss border on his way into Germany, a region popular among billionaires and bankers for its privacy. As routine, customs officers checked his luggage, and what they found in his briefcase raised immediate alarm. It was something highly unusual, financial documents tied to bank accounts supposedly worth over $8 billion. These weren't ordinary receipts or tax forms, but sensitive, high-level financial records, investment documents, and papers connected to large international transfers. This discovery immediately sparked suspicion, and Don was detained for questioning as an investigation into potential money laundering began. The situation escalated quickly. A spokesperson for the German Customs Investigation Department explained to the press, "There's a reasonable suspicion that Mr. Johnson was working for others. If everything is legal, you don't have to transport documents worth this amount in a car." Investigators dug into the origins of the accounts, where the money was headed, and Don's involvement. Was he collaborating with international bankers? Was he part of an elaborate scheme, or just the face of something more sinister? As the story hit the media, it quickly spiraled into wild theories. Some tabloids suggested that Don was linked to a high-stakes financial conspiracy, while others believed he was unwittingly transporting documents for shady individuals. Don, however, insisted he had no knowledge of any illicit activity. He claimed he was simply traveling with business associates, and the documents were part of a film financing deal, not money. He emphasized that nothing illegal had taken place. Fortunately, after a thorough investigation, German authorities cleared him of any wrongdoing. The case was dropped a few weeks later, with no charges or arrests. While the matter was resolved, the scandal lingered. The media and public reaction was harsh. Even though Don was exonerated, the damage was done. Headlines were unforgiving, and the online buzz was relentless. For someone who had already been the subject of rumors surrounding his personal life, this was just more fuel for the fire. Questions began to emerge. Was Don broke? Was he involved in shady business, or just associating with the wrong crowd? Suddenly, Don wasn't just a former heartthrob with addiction issues, he was now tied to an $8 billion international mystery. And despite being cleared, the negative publicity stuck. In Hollywood, scandals are to be avoided at all costs, and this one cost Don several career opportunities, marking the start of his financial troubles. Even though Don cleared his name in the money laundering scandal, his financial troubles were far from over. By the early 2000s, the glamour had faded, and the acting roles slowed down. But instead of being cautious with his finances, Don continued living as though money was endless. He splurged on multiple homes, luxury cars, extravagant ex-wives, and child support. This lifestyle proved to be a huge mistake, one that would eventually lead to his financial downfall. Business ventures followed, but many of them were poorly planned and began to backfire. Despite clear signs that his income was unstable, Don kept living the high life, and his financial stability started to crumble. Every month, new bills piled up, new debts emerged, and cash flow dwindled. It was a classic story of a celebrity whose outward wealth masked a deep financial crisis. The final blow came when Don nearly lost his beautiful $10 million home in Aspen, Colorado. He had owned this stunning property for years, a 10,000-square-foot mountain retreat in one of the most expensive areas in America. But in 2004, things nearly took a devastating turn. Don defaulted on a $930,000 loan, and the bank threatened to seize the property. It was a tense situation, and foreclosure seemed imminent. However, Don narrowly avoided disaster at the last minute when mysterious financial backing came through. How he managed to save the home is still unclear. Some believe a wealthy investor stepped in, while others think Don borrowed money from friends or sold personal assets, like art or jewelry. Regardless, he managed to avert the crisis, but the damage was already done. The public now knew that Don Johnson was in serious financial trouble. He owed millions to several creditors, including Aspen Valley Hospital, a liquor store, and a law firm. The image of a man who once earned millions now begging to save his home was jarring. When the near foreclosure became public, fans were shocked. How could someone who had earned tens of millions of dollars go broke? How could someone so successful end up on the brink of losing everything? The tabloids had a field day, labeling it the ultimate riches to rags story, and Don's reputation took another hit. But the troubles didn't end there. In 2008, Don filed a lawsuit against Racher Entertainment for $23 million, claiming they owed him unpaid profits from his show Nash Bridges. He argued the show had earned over $1 billion in syndication and distribution deals, and he was entitled to his share. The legal battle was long and messy, but in the end, Don won. A jury awarded him $23.2 million, offering him a financial lifeline just as he was sinking. Still, by this point, Don had been through so much: financial turmoil, personal struggles, and his reckless handling of money had already left a mark. His history of high-profile relationships also came at a high cost, with multiple divorces, child support, and luxury living. By the time Don reached his early 60s, whispers spread in Hollywood that his career was over. Studios weren't calling, and the offers had dried up. As aging in Hollywood can be particularly harsh on stars once known for their looks, it wasn't just about the money. It was about relevance, and it seemed Don was fading from the spotlight. However, when it seemed he had hit rock bottom, Don surprised everyone. He didn't give up or disappear. Instead, he made a calculated comeback. He didn't return as a heartthrob or leading man but as the wise, cool older guy with stories to tell. He took roles in shows like Eastbound and Down, appeared in films, and in 2024, starred in the Netflix original Rebel Ridge. The film introduced him to a new generation of fans, marking a fresh chapter in his career. Now, at 75, Don Johnson is a survivor. He's no longer the reckless party boy or the former star begging banks for help. He's a man who has weathered addiction, scandals, lawsuits, and financial ruin and still found a way to rise. He's sober, close with his children, and has embraced the ups and downs of his life. Looking back, it's evident that his downfall began when he adopted a lifestyle far beyond his income. He had the mansions, the designer clothes, and the glitz, but lacked a solid financial plan. He never slowed down to build financial security, relying on fame-fueled spending and misplaced trust in the wrong people. Once the big checks stopped rolling in, it all caught up with him. But the silver lining is that despite losing millions and making poor choices, Don Johnson is still here, and, in many ways, he's cooler than ever.